Welcome back to the Wholesome Fertility channel. I'm your host, Michelle Orbitz, and I am so excited to bring you this topic today, which is really fascinating. But before I get started, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button so that you don't miss any future episodes that relate to fertility health and really empowering your fertility journey from a holistic perspective. So today I am going to be talking about a really fascinating topic, which is how endometriosis is linked to the vagal tone. So I'm going to talk about really what that is and describe it and break it apart for you. But endometriosis is a condition when the endometrial tissue in the lining of the uterus grows outside of the uterus in many different parts, and it can grow outside to areas like the ovaries, and it can grow into even the intestines and even bladder in certain circumstances. And it's a very painful condition that can cause major cramps and really debilitating to the point where people can't even function or work. And it's also linked to a lot of gut imbalances and a lot of inflammation. So it's a very highly inflammatory condition. And one of the reasons why I talk about this is because it is one of the conditions that can cause fertility challenges for many women. And it is really sensitive to hormones. So in some cases, things like IVF can cause an increase in incidences and growth of endometriosis. So it is really important, but yet there are a lot of things that people can do to support it. And there are a lot of studies on certain supplements, which I'm not going to cover today, that can also help. So if you want to learn more, stay tuned. So now that I mentioned what endometriosis is and really the condition and how it can impact your fertility health, I'm going to also talk about vagal tone and really what the connection is between the vagal tone and endometriosis. If you heard some of my earlier episodes, you'll know that I talk a lot about the vagus nerve and about how the nervous system is so impactful when it comes to reproductive health. It's gotten to the point where that has become my obsession as a fertility practitioner because it is so important, and it really explains the yin and the yang process and really how the body is able to get into homeostasis and regulate itself. And it's so pivotal when it comes to fertility health. So the vagus nerve is a cranial nerve, and it's the largest cranial nerve in the body, but it plays an incredibly important role. And I've mentioned this before, but I'm going to mention it again in case you haven't seen it before. What it does is it actually communicates with the enteric nervous system, and it also, which is your digestive nervous system, and it's neurons, hundreds of millions of neurons that go throughout your whole digestive process. And it can be one of the causes for people having issues with digestion when there's a low vagal tone, because it is so impactful when it comes to digestion. And one of the things that vagus nerve does is that it impacts the parasympathetic or rest and digest aspect of the body. So when your body is in parasympathetic, that is the optimal time to digest food. And it can also cause a more calm state of mind where your body is not in fight or flight, but it's more regenerative. So when it is in fight or flight, it's a little bit more of the sympathetic response. Now, there's nothing wrong with being in the sympathetic response. It's not like the bad state to be in. It's actually part of our nervous system and part of the autonomic nervous system, which composes of both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. But when it becomes too chronic, then it can cause a lot of different problems, and the body gets into a more survival state. So vagal tone basically refers to the vagus nerve's ability to function. So the stronger it is, the stronger it functions, the stronger the vagal tone. And one of the ways that you can actually measure vagal tone is through something called heart rate variability, HRV. And you can see many different apps, many different devices that actually measure that. And Heart Math Institute also discusses a lot about that. And they talk about the heart brain coherence, and they look at heart rate variability and vagal tone. And there's actually certain types of exercises, and we'll be talking about this at the end, that you can do to actually increase vagal tone and increase heart rate variability, and also increase, just by doing so, heart brain coherence. So the higher the heart-brain coherence and the higher the heart rate variability, the more calm we feel, the better state that we have. And apparently in conditions of endometriosis, the vagal tone is actually lower. So one of the things that I would definitely suggest if you do have endometriosis is to improve that vagal tone. And I'm going to be discussing many, many different ways to do that. So as we know with endometriosis, one of the things that it's linked to is digestive issues. And the higher the vagal tone and the better the vagus nerve is functioning, the better it can talk to and basically communicate with the enteric nervous system, which is really your digestive nervous system. And so we know that when we stimulate the vagus nerve, it can actually improve your digestive system. And when that happens, you're not only improving your ability to take in nutrients, but you're also decreasing the inflammation in the body, which is really pivotal when it comes to not just endometriosis, but egg quality and overall fertility health. So this is something that anybody who's going through the fertility journey, male or female, can benefit from, regardless if you have endometriosis or not. So just to kind of go back on the endometriosis topic, one of the ways, really the only true way that you can know if you have endometriosis is by getting a laparoscopy. And it is a surgery. So I'm not saying to go and do that. However, if you suspect that you might have endometriosis based on inflammation, gut imbalance, really strong menstrual pain, pain with periods, and kind of lower back pain around that time, then you could still do this because you're going to benefit from it anyway. So I would definitely say, listen to this. And many times there is a perspective on medicine that if you're going to treat it anyway, and the way to diagnose it has some risk, then not to diagnose it. Now, this is more of a medical perspective from speaking to doctors. I'm not a doctor and I'm not giving medical advice. So I do want to throw that out there. So I would go and talk to your doctor if you do suspect that you have endometriosis to get your options. So besides looking at heart rate variability, you may kind of realize if your heart rate variability is high or your vagal tone is high based on how well you get back from really stressful situations. So if you are the type of person that gets anxious pretty easily, startles really easily, has like an off nervous system, gets really nervous around people, that's okay to a certain extent if it's not chronic, if it's not something that's really impacting your life. But if it is impacting your life and it's something that happens, and when you get out of those environments that trigger that, you continue feeling like that, that may mean that you have a lower vagal tone, which means that you're not able to go from and adapt from one state of stress to a more calm state of your nervous system. So while that doesn't confirm heart rate variability, and ultimately the best thing to do is really to measure it, and you can measure it with many devices like even Oura Ring, there's many devices that actually track your body and your heart rate variability. And that would be the ultimate way to confirm it. But there are definitely symptoms that you can feel as well. So studies do confirm that women have a lower vagal tone if they have endometriosis, and that a lower vagal tone is also linked with higher inflammatory conditions. Some of the things in life that can impact vagal tone really do have to do with high stress. So if you're constantly exposed to high stress in your life, that can impact your vagal tone. And also, I've mentioned this before, it's really important to know that if you do have high stress, it's not the end of the world if you have some stress, but high stress chronically can really impact your overall health. And it can also throw off your nervous system balance. I'll be covering things that will also benefit you as well. So what's pretty amazing is that there have been studies, actually animal studies, which will improve the vagus nerve function, has been shown to decrease lesions in animals of endometriosis. And this is thought to be because vagus nerve stimulation can regulate and decrease inflammatory markers in the body. So I'm going to cover a few ways that you can stimulate your vagus nerve overall. And then I'm also going to cover a technique that is used in heart math and how that can also impact an increased heart rate variability and also increased heart-brain coherence, which also creates a state of peace and calm, which we know is linked to the vagal tone. So breath work is amazing, and it works with the diaphragm, especially belly breath. So as a child, you probably knew how to breathe. You'll see babies breathe from their bellies because that belly breath is actually the way we're supposed to breathe. But as we get older, we actually learn habits that are not really great for breathing. So belly breath is really good. So you could put your hand on right underneath your ribs, which is where your diaphragm is, and start to use that, really the diaphragm as a muscle, and breathe in and out, and do this a couple of times a day to retrain yourself to breathe from the belly. I remember not doing that, and then years ago learning and retraining myself to the point where it became unconscious and I was just a belly breather. And it really impacted how I felt in general because I used to have generalized social anxiety. And I remember going in for body work, a massage, and the woman said, "Oh, you're a belly breather." So it is something that I was like, "Oh, I'm so happy. I'm so proud of myself that I actually trained myself. I wasn't even focusing on trying." And she noticed it. So it is something that you can train yourself. It's a habit that we have. It becomes unconscious. So just like a good habit can become unconscious, a bad habit can become unconscious, but you can also change that bad habit to a good unconscious habit. So I've talked about slow, deep breathing, but you can also do something called box breathing, which is inhale to 4, hold to 4, exhale to 4, and then hold out to 4. And then you can slowly increase that with time. I remember when I used to teach Kundalini yoga, we had something called, it was like the meditation aspect of the yoga training. And it was something called the minute breath. And we would breathe in. So it's not quite the boxed. It would breathe in to 20, hold for 20, breathe out to 20. And that's 60 seconds. And doing so really calms the mind. And of course, you'd have to work yourself up to doing that and not do that right off the bat because it is very hard and it is a practice you have to build up to. So another thing that can help stimulate the vagus nerve is cold exposure. Now, with Chinese medicine, you may have heard me say that it's not really great to have chronic cold exposure. So I often tell people, keep your feet warm or put socks on and don't put your feet on cold tile. Now, this is a chronic thing. This is doing something day in, day out. And also, we do have our first kidney point on the bottom of our feet. The kidneys are in charge of our reproductive health. So you don't want that coldness from the tile to come up from the feet into the channels. So this is why I say that for a day in and day out. But once in a while, you can give yourself a little cold exposure because doing so, like maybe doing a quick cold shower once in a while is okay. Now, if you are, of course, this isn't for everybody. If you are somebody who tends to be cold all the time, this may not be for you. But what they do find is that that quick stress effect of the cold exposure, like even a cold plunge, can actually stimulate the vagus nerve. So it's a quick stress response, and then the body goes from stress, which is the sympathetic, to parasympathetic. It starts to stimulate that nervous system regulation. Another thing that can really be beneficial is gargling or humming. And I personally love to om if I feel really stressed. Even if I'm driving, I just om or hum. What humming does is it actually slows down your breath. And you may have heard me say this before in previous episodes, is that when you breathe slow and deep, you actually calm your nervous system. And especially your exhale. So the longer your exhale, the calmer your nervous system, and the more it's going to go into parasympathetic mode. So when you're inhaling and you're exhaling with a hum, it slows it down. It actually stops it from being cleared fast. And of course, meditation and mindfulness. Now, what meditation does is it really gets us to a state of receptivity and a state of listening. When we're in meditation, we're paying attention to ourselves, even ourselves when we're anxious or we're feeling uncomfortable. When you're feeling that sensation, it's almost like a somatic acknowledgement of your body sensation. So you're aware, you become more aware of what happens when you are feeling uncomfortable. And then having those times during the day, is really beneficial for that mindfulness to increase, because the more you give yourself opportunities to pay attention to yourself, your mind, your body, how it feels, the more mindful you become, the more you can get really tuned in with your nervous system. And that awareness has been shown to really improve your overall physiology, which in turn can help your nervous system regulation and your vagal tone. And of course, one of my favorites is acupuncture. Acupuncture can help tremendously. And we actually have a bunch of points that I use often to stimulate the vagus nerve. And part of it is in the ears. So another thing that I would suggest, if you can't get to acupuncture, is just massage your ears or even massage your feet. Anything that really stimulates that calming effect. But the ears are one of the ways that we can access the vagus nerve. So I hope you enjoyed this episode, and feel free to share this with anybody that you think can benefit from this information. It is information that you may not often hear. I haven't heard about it before until I stumbled upon it. And I was like, that's very interesting. And then the more I learn about the nervous system, the more impacts I see that it has over reproductive health. So I hope this was beneficial for you. And if you ever have any questions, ideas, or thoughts for future episodes, you can always reach out to me and DM me on Instagram, where I am very active, and my handle is at the Wholesome Lotus Fertility. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next time.